The U.S. Supreme Court, where free speech goes to die. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, the U.S. Supreme Court recently refused to take up an appeal from what was then a 7th grade student who was forced to remove a T-shirt that said on it, "There are only two genders." He filed a complaint, obviously, it got up to federal court, and the federal court basically said that the school district has the right to protect students. And let me see if I can get this language right, because they're very concerned that the student had a demeaning message that disrupts the learning environment. The principal at the school, one Heather Tucker, said that the T-shirt of the 7th grader was because she had dealt with so many of the mental challenges that transgender students have. She thought that it was incumbent upon her to keep that kid from being in school. He had to take the shirt off or go home. Later, Steve Green, the student came back with the same shirt, and he had taped over some of the offending words and wrote "censored" on the tape. Steve, guess what happened with that shirt?
It was forced to take that one off too.
Yes, it was.
Well, here's the thing. Let's pick a standard and apply it universally. Can we do that? That would be nice. I'm old enough now. I just turned 56. I'm old enough that I don't remember there being much in the way of politics in school. You might talk about it in an econ class. You might talk about it in a history class or something. But the general air at either of the high schools I went to, middle school, elementary schools, I went to like 4 of those, I think. I don't remember them being politicized outside of classes that had anything to do with politics, although in 6th grade, we held a mock presidential election. It was 1980. And then in college at the University of Missouri, Professor Hardy, his political science class, did a huge mock election every 4 years. And that was a lot of fun. But aside from that, it was not a political environment. So what is the standard? Is the standard we are going to celebrate politicized sexuality in school? Are we going to allow that discussion? Are we going to encourage that discussion at school? Or are we going to say, you know what? School is for learning the 3 R's, and we're gonna stick to that and leave the politics behind. We'll just set that aside. Leave it. Check that in your locker when you get your books in the morning. That would be my approach, by the way. That's my preference. But we seem to have 2 standards here. On the one hand, the schools are celebrating gender fluid diversity, whatever we're calling it this week, which, by the way, didn't really exist until it got politicized just in the last few years. Or are we going to silence it? Well, we've got one side getting silenced, one side getting celebrated. That's not American. The law is supposed to apply. The rules are supposed to apply to all sides equally. And let's just either shut all this down or let all voices be heard at school. Those are the only 2 choices.
And as Steve points out, that same school did promote LGBTQ rights with posters and such in their hallways. Bill Whittle, Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas dissented from the court's refusal to hear arguments in this case. And as with most of these situations, the court didn't put out a statement. They just refused to hear arguments. However, Thomas and Alito said that they would have liked to have heard those arguments, and this is their quote: so long as the First Circuit's opinion is on the books, meaning the lower court that stood by the school district principal and not the kid, so long as that opinion is on the books, thousands of students will attend school without the full panoply of First Amendment rights, as they wrote. Bill, it's a T-shirt. I mean, I've seen some T-shirts that I thought were in really poor taste, but it's a T-shirt that makes a simple statement, honestly, of fact. And the only complaint I have about it is that he said there are only 2 genders. He should have said 2 sexes. But can you imagine that the Supreme Court wouldn't stand by the First Amendment rights of that student to be able to express himself in that way, clearly taking what is not a fringe or provocative position, or at least it wouldn't have been 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, a couple things here. Most of my time is going to be just agreeing with Steve. But first of all, I think we can agree that schools should have a dress code, and that the dress code is part of you're a child. You're not 18 years old. You have fundamental rights, but you don't have universal rights, and so on. So I think I don't think you should be able to have a T-shirt that says F the patriarchy, and I don't think you should have, so a school has a right to enforce a dress code on the student body. So you could already argue that's an infringement on their speech, but that to me seems perfectly reasonable. The issue is if the left didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all. And so the answer to this question is very simple. I will go home and remove my shirt that says there are only two genders, and you will pull down all of your pride flags and all of your transgender flags. And we will leave the subject out of high school because it doesn't belong in high school. But to say that one side has to back down while the other side is celebrated is the core of the issue here. And this is the unfairness of it.
Yeah, if the shirt bill had said, no one can tell you there are only two genders, he would have been allowed to wear it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's be clear also. When the teacher says I had to protect my trans students, it's not like the guy came in with a shirt that said "kill the trannies," right?
Yeah.
So my second response to this upon hearing the story is, if it turns out that your students are so triggered and so emotionally crippled by the fact that somebody makes a fundamental statement of biological fact, you probably shouldn't be in school at all. You should probably be in a mental institution. You should probably be seeking help, because if you are so emotionally unstable that you're not able to deal with somebody having not only a different opinion of you, but as I said, this guy wasn't coming out with a "we got to put them in camps" kind of thing. He was simply making a biological statement of fact, and this fragility. I'll go even one step further. The teacher who thinks that they are helping their children by protecting them from unpleasant experiences only perpetuates and accelerates their weakness and their emotional crippling for the rest of their lives. If the argument is, if my kids see this, it's going to stress them or it's going to make them feel bad. Well, guess what? There's a lot of stuff in the world that stresses people and makes them feel bad. The entire idea of getting an education is to widen your horizons and to experience things that you didn't know before. I don't remember junior high school as being a time of untrammeled harmony, where all we did was basically just pat each other on the back and tell each other how wonderful we are for trying so hard. It's a political ratchet, Scott. It only moves in one direction. When it moves in one direction towards the left, it's allowed to move as much as it can, and then when it gets pulled back in the other direction, it locks. So we're going to take this gain and we're going to run with it as far as we can, and when somebody tries to pull back, it locks. And this has got to come to an end. And the Supreme Court absolutely should have heard this case. But I don't think it's a First Amendment case. I think it's a fundamental fairness case, and also would be an interesting case for the Supreme Court to make some kind of ruling on what the parameters, what are legitimate parameters that a school can impose on students as part of the fact that you are in school. This is more like the dress code issue, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a distinction that's worth drawing. By the way, for those of our viewers who are interested, the case was called LM, as in the letters LM. The student went by that in court papers because he was a minor, versus Middleborough, the name of the school district. The docket number is 24-410. What really bothered me about this is this idea that somehow there is an arbiter of what is offensive and demeaning, and that person is Heather Tucker, the principal of the school, and she gets to decide. She also gets to approve the LGBTQ posters that get posted in the hallway supporting transgender student rights because she feels bad that these people have mental trauma Maybe if she really felt bad, she'd help them to get the actual mental health assistance that they need and work with their parents to help them address this trauma. But to say that our public schools, which are funded by state and local and federal tax money, are a no free speech zone with something as mild as a simple statement of biological fact, like Bill said, not something that was antagonizing, and to say, well, that's demeaning because you have stated something that is patently true. Even if it were debatable, why not have the debate? Why not let the statement stand? Why not let other students engage with that student if they wish to and say, I disagree with the statement on your shirt. I've been known years ago to wear some pretty provocative T-shirts. And in one case, although I didn't think this one was provocative, I was sent home from work because on Dress Down Friday, when you could wear T-shirts and jeans, I wore a T-shirt that had a cross on it and had a Bible verse that said, take up your cross and follow me. I was told that I had to remove that shirt or go home, and I chose to go home. And so I get a little bit of what this kid's going through, but I think it's worse for this kid because he's a minor. He has to do what the grown-ups say. He's supposed to be looking up to these people, and I would love for our schools to be in a position to say, I see you're taking a position on this particular issue. Tell me about your thinking on this, or let him just have his free market engagement of ideas among his fellow students. Why is it that message has to be shut down? And why is it that the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't have the guts to listen to it and say, you know what, maybe we need to rethink exactly what rights you have when you go to a government-funded school. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.